on this episode of Postcards.
The art is being patient in wet plate photography. You try to learn to slow down.
I think Town Ball has been important to these small rural communities in that it gives a community a reason to be.
This program on Pioneer Public Television is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org. The Arrowwood Resort and Conference Center, your ideal choice for Minnesota resorts, offering luxury townhomes, 18 holes of golf, Darling Reflection Spa, Big Splash Water Park, and much more. Alexandria, Minnesota. Explore hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for a great vacation or a place to hold an event. ExploreAlex.com. Tri-State Brain and Spine Institute, with locations in Alexandria, Edina, Crookston, and Maple Grove. Doctors dedicated to evaluating and treating all types of brain and spine problems, no matter how complex.
You will need first a mate, straw, and some grass or herb, hot water. Also, take your grass or your herb and fill your mate. You have to bounce it this way, so that the grass comes to one side. You start pouring it in the empty side. You have to wait until the grass absorbs the water.
They are progressive. They decided to legalize marijuana, one of the first countries in all of South America, as a way of heading off the drug cartels. They have socialized medicine. So anybody can go to the doctor, and no matter how poor they are or how sick they are, they're not going to be afraid of not being able to pay the bill. They have a strong renewable energy sector, and they have strong environmental protections. They have a grass-based agriculture system. Rather than raising corn and feeding them on feedlots, the cows are raised on pasture, and it's a different type of meat. It's a healthier type of meat. What is interesting about the country is that they aren't afraid to try things.
How many people? Like, how's the population?
Probably close to 6,000, I'd say.
Wow.
Yeah. They're very small. Very small.
How many people live in Montevideo, Uruguay?
Like
1.5 million.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
it's like the capital of the country, so we have to help people.
Yeah, my definition of small just changed.
We are this world connected now through YouTube, through Facebook, and that's why these person-to-person exchanges are so important, because you get past the stereotypes and you get to see people for who they are and their values, and you make a connection that goes beyond the stereotypes or the preconceived notions of who somebody was, and you connect on a heart level.
I do think this is quite new to our generation, connecting around the whole world, especially because of the technology boom that we're having. And I think it will change the world because people will understand not to be narrow-minded and thinking just about themselves and the people around them, but also just encompassing the whole world.
Wet plate photography is, I guess, the great-great-granddaddy of analog, is what we would call it. So it began photography as we know it today. It's very involved, it's very technical, and it's probably one of the hardest types of photography to master. I've been interested in history my whole life. Fortunately or unfortunately, my father was a history teacher, so it kind of got beaten into me at an early age, so to speak. Afterwards, I was interested in the Civil War, went to college, got a degree in history, and ended up being a director here at the Pipestone County Historical Society. About a year after I was here, we found a collection of glass negatives up in one of the old buildings, several hundred of them. And it was at that time I really started wondering, how did they make those? And that led one thing to another until the year 2000, when I found a guy, a hermit in upstate New York, that did this on his farm, and studied with him for a week, and he gifted me his chemical recipes. And by 2002, I was actually making my own plates and, finally starting to learn how to do this. Between he and old 19th century textbooks that had the recipes in it, you had to kind of learn by trial and error. And today, I'm very jealous because with the internet, a lot of the people that are doing this today have kind of really hands-on way to see things, and there are online forums and blogs and all kinds of things going on. So if anything saved wet plate, I think it's the internet, which is kind of an interesting combination. The wet plate process was developed kind of by accident in 1851 by an Englishman. He did not patent his process. Bad for him, good for the world. Within 10 years, in 1861, at the start of the American Civil War, there were 10,000 photographers in our country alone. And they were not trying to preserve history, they were trying to make a buck, which is the American way. They inadvertently preserved history, and those are some of the more poignant, beautiful, and very historically touching photos we have in our country, I think. The art is being patient in wet plate photography. You try to learn to slow down. There's no such thing as a candid photo. Everything has to be staged and posed. The film I make has an ASA of 2, so very slow film. So usually that means you open your lens cap to take the photo for up to 20 to 30 seconds indoors. And then to finish the photo taking, you just put the lens cap back on. Afterwards, the development takes about 10 minutes, but you have a piece in your hand within 10 minutes. If that's junk, you can rub it out and start over. But you have to do the whole process again. You can't make those overnight and keep them and shoot them all the next day. Today, in our modern world, everything is instant gratification. You take a photo, you look at it right away. You don't like it, you can Photoshop it and change it. With wet plate photography, every piece of film has to be made by hand. Every film is loaded in the camera one at a time. It has to be exposed and developed before it dries out or turns to junk. And so you have a little clock ticking inside the film. It has to be within 5 minutes or so. Wet plate photography in the 1860s was a matter of flowing different chemicals and water and things onto a substrate or a plate. And in doing that, you would make a piece of metal or a piece of glass into a viable negative, which could be used in a camera to make a photograph. We start either with a piece of blackened metal or clear single pane window glass. Today I have metal. We'll be pouring a chemical onto that metal called collodion, which is a compound of nitrocellulose, ether, and grain alcohol. After pouring collodion onto the plate, you flow the chemical on as solidly and as uniformly as you can. You'll take this plate, hold it by one corner, and tip it into a vat of what is silver nitrate. It stays in the dark there for about 2 to 5 minutes. Afterwards, I go underneath, load that plate, which, by the way, is now would be dripping wet of silver nitrate and kind of a cloudy white color, and you put it into a plate holder, emulsion side down. After it's put into this light tight slate or holder, you can see this opens and closes, exposing the plate. You can take this safely out and move it to the waiting camera, which has been pre-focused on your subject. The photo is just taken by removing the lens cap from the camera and letting the light strike this exposed plate. Afterwards, this is closed again, and the plate is moved back into the darkened room or dark box where developers poured onto it, and that way the image starts to become visible. This portable camera that I have was made for me about 5 years ago. So the box is new, but it's made exactly the way the cameras would have been made. The actual lens I found on eBay, and it's an original lens from the 1860s. So it's as close to the real thing as we'll ever get. Well, I've been lucky to have some of my photography featured in several major motion pictures. True Grit, not the John Wayne, but the remake. Cowboys and Aliens, as well as a movie called A Million Ways to Die in the West. The first one was just knowing somebody who knew somebody else. They liked the work, and so the prop director in the next movie knew I did this work and was able to feature my photography in that, and so on. And it's without going anywhere, people are coming here to find me. This whole process was eclipsed in the 1880s by a dry plate photography process, which was a glass negative that could be preserved and stored, and you didn't have to flow it when you're wet and everything. Unfortunately, you have a grain in that, which isn't as beautiful as this, I don't think, with the silver process. What keeps me going in this art form is not so much the thing, the money or the success. It's the journey. And every day you learn and you meet great people, and you make true believers out of people that didn't know anything like this existed before you talk to them. Although wet plate is an old and oftentimes dead, it is, I think, something that is so viable and so beautiful, even with all the problems with the chemistry and things that are inherent in each plate. It's like looking through kind of into a dreamlike world, and I'd like everybody to be able to experience that. You know, the silver that just kind of shines on the plate when you look at it, and it's just, you can't describe it sometimes. And every time you pour a plate, I know what the chemical compositions are. I know how they react to each other. So you basically know what's going to happen. But every time you pour the fixer on that plate and it blooms in front of you in your hands, it's like magic every time.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care.
Town baseball that started in Murray County started just about 10 years after the 1862 U.S.-Dakota War. Within 10 years, in those same pastures, there were organized baseball teams. And those teams became almost an institution that gathered people similar to the churches and to the businesses and to the schools. In fact, there were town teams often before there were even towns. And now the town teams sustain community. It gives small communities something to rally around and be proud of.
Well, it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Town baseball and baseball in general was a passion of people. It was their entertainment on Sunday afternoon. There wasn't movie theaters, there wasn't TV, radio. This is what people did for social activity on Sundays. Town baseball was the entertainment outlet for people. So when it was billed and events were pulled off the same way as an entertainer coming to town.
You'd have a picnic, you'd bring your lunch, you'd watch the baseball game, you'd root for your home team. If you brought your car, in the 19-teens, you'd bring your car and you'd park it on one side of the field, and if you brought your horse and buggy, you'd park it on the other side of the field. They were separate. They didn't park them all together. One of the most noted leagues in the county, we had 3 teams that belonged to what was called the First Night League, which started in 1948. And that is just as its title says. It was the first league in the state that played all of their games at night because all of the fields had electrical lighting.
Black baseball teams came through southern Minnesota often. It was important for several reasons. One of them was how blacks were accepted at that time. They came through teams like the St. Paul Colored Gophers, the Tennessee Rats, the All Nations team, the Chicago Union Giants made regular trips through southern Minnesota. We've seen newspaper articles that say some of the greatest players ever came through southern Minnesota at that time. It's important for people to understand how the spread of baseball didn't matter what color a person was, it mattered how great they played and people came out to watch.
Blacks weren't able to play professional baseball. They were barred from that. They created their own teams and they traveled the country to try and make money. Those teams would come and play an exhibition game with the local town teams. And they'd get a flat fee for coming, and then they'd get a part of the gate fee as well. And so they could make some money by playing baseball in these small towns. Later on, there were people playing on the teams here in the area that were black. John Donaldson came here in the early 1920s and played with Lismore. He was a paid pitcher. Later on in the 1940s, they hired semi-professional and professional black baseball players to play in the First Night League, and they were paid positions, and they began to integrate baseball at that time in the late 1940s.
We actually had segregated baseball from the mid-20s until 1947. So while there were players like John Donaldson that in fact did play for individual teams, any team that attempted to be a part of the system that advanced to the state tournament couldn't have an African American player on it, or it couldn't be an all-black team. So all of the all-black teams that played during those times were really independent teams, sometimes playing within leagues, but were kept out of playoffs. Segregation, again, just primarily went because people were biased about somebody's color and the fear of that they were different.
As Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, here in these town teams, that barrier had already been broken by someone like John Donaldson.
John Donaldson was a great Negro League baseball player. He was 6 foot tall, about 200 pounds, and was a power left-handed pitcher. He played for 35 seasons, started in 1908 and went to 1943. He played all over the upper Midwest, played in over 130 cities in Minnesota alone. One of the reasons John Donaldson was great was that he was a major leaguer who couldn't play in the major leagues. He drew crowds based on them coming to see him play because they knew he was a major leaguer. People loved baseball and they wanted to see major league talent, and when John Donaldson was in their town, they knew that. And so thousands and thousands of people came out to see him play because they knew he was a major leaguer. He would routinely strike out 20 players in a town in Minnesota, South Dakota, or the upper Midwest, and beat everybody in your town, and then you'd ask him to come back the next year because the crowd was so big, your baseball team could make money that way. His legacy was taken away from him. He pitched for 35 years. Barely anybody knows who he is now. It's important for us to tell his story and have his legacy restored. We have about 39 seconds of John Donaldson playing baseball, and it's really important because generations today need that visual component to see how he was great.
You love to play, and if you can get paid for playing, that's a plus. He was making $450 a month here in Minnesota. That was a pretty big salary for anybody at that point in time. That's a lot of money. But at the same time, I think we all have those aspirations to be appreciated.
Issues of racism were prevalent all the time. John Donaldson faced that everywhere he went. He took a very progressive attitude towards that. We have newspaper reports that quote him as saying he gets shouted racial epithets all the time, but he's being paid to be there, which is a very progressive attitude. He always said that he wondered why he wouldn't be respected as a man and why he had to take the abuse from the crowd, but he understood he was getting paid, and so he moved on and tried not to let that bother him. But issues of racism were everywhere.
If we go into 1947, when Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier, it's very interesting to me because some of the great black baseball players that played, at least in the Twin Cities, had stopped playing by the time they got to high school because there was no place to go until Jackie breaks the color barrier. But even then, when Jackie Robinson retires after playing 10 years in 1956 or before the 1956 season, there are still 3 teams that are segregated in Major League Baseball.
I believe the issue of racism hasn't changed. It's an individual idea portrayed upon someone else. I think that it's important that we learn from the past and understand that people did live through those things, and let's not be doomed to do that again ourselves.
I think it's important to know that in this great state where we have baseball is a part of our tradition, it would be good to know all of the players that were very good players, regardless of what they look like. If they were a good baseball player, we should talk about them as a baseball player first, and then as an individual second, of who they were, what color they may have been. It really shouldn't matter.
I think town ball has been important to these small rural communities in that it gives a community a reason to be in a time when towns are losing population. They've helped build and help sustain a sense of cohesiveness in these small rural communities, and that's been important ever since the first baseball player stepped onto one of those pastures and picked up a baseball bat.
This program on Pioneer Public Television is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org. The Arrowwood Resort and Conference Center, your ideal choice for Minnesota resorts, offering luxury townhomes, 18 holes of golf, Darling Reflections Spa, Big Splash Water Park, and much more. Alexandria, Minnesota. Explore hundreds of lakes, trails, and attractions for a great vacation or a place to hold an event. ExploreAlex.com. Tri-State Brain and Spine Institute, with locations in Alexandria, Edina, Crookston, and Maple Grove. Doctors dedicated to evaluating and treating all types of brain and spine problems, no matter how complex.